Okay, so this class is part of the Psoas exploration series. And the psoas is that deep muscle close to the lumbar spine that attaches around where the diaphragm is, the 12th rib, and buttresses the sides of the lower spine, and it goes through the front of your pelvis. So it's close to the skin here in the hip flexor area, and then it attaches on the inside of your upper thigh bone. So it holds your leg to your spine. That's one of its main functions, is to create that stability from leg to spine. And today we're going to be doing a really relaxing exploratory class where we're going to be just juicing up this area. And mostly what we're going to be doing is using a blanket. So that's what you'll really need. We're going to start the class with a little bit more activity. And for your class today, if you want 2 thick blocks for your lunges, we'll just do a couple of lunges, you don't need them. And if you want a strap to add a little more hamstring stretch into your practices on the back, then grab that too. So I'll give you a sec to grab that. And we'll start out in a seat. So let's use our blanket for a little bit of height. I'm so glad you're here. And begin by leaning left and right. You might even close your eyes for this. Feeling into your low back, your low spine, and then lean forwards and back. You might have your hands on your knees, however you're sitting. And then let's circle. So circle around, noticing how your spine feels like it plugs into the pelvis. And if your eyes are closed and you're breathing into this, you can go the other way. Can you locate your spine, especially your low spine, inside the torso? All right, let's come to the center. Let's lean forwards, walk out on our hands. And maybe the elbows come down, and find a bit of a low back stretch here, grounding your sit bones down into the floor. And as you're starting to breathe a little more consciously, can you breathe along your low back? Can you imagine that you're breathing down your low spine into your pelvis when you inhale? And as you exhale, breathe up your low spine, up into your lungs, into your mid-back. It's like you're breathing along the pathway of the psoas. And then let's walk our hands over to the right. So you can walk a little over, maybe a lot. You might let your elbows drop down. Some people might even get an elbow to the outside of the knee, and the other elbow a little lifted. Wherever you get, take a breath into that left side body. And notice if you're holding your abdomen tight when you breathe. Can you really feel the expansion into your front, back, and sides of your abdomen when you breathe? And we'll walk through the center and over to the other side. Your right sit bone might want to pop up. You can press with your hands to let it drop down a little bit. And breathe along the low back, if you can imagine that. Each inhale creating a little more space. Each exhale creating a little more length. And then walk back into the center. Pad yourself up. You might hold onto your knees here and lift your chest for a little counter pose. And let's release that and come onto our hands and knees. We'll go through one sequence of lunges here. So you can take the blanket to the side, and on the hands and knees, you might do a little bit of circling onto your wrists. If you don't love weight bearing on your hands like this, you can always come onto your fists and circle a little bit forwards and back. And then coming back down onto your hands, or staying on your fists there, and arching your spine, letting your pelvis tip forwards, maybe letting your shoulder blades come together. Look a little forwards there. And then rounding through your spine, tucking your pelvis under, pressing into your hands, maybe spreading your shoulder blades apart. And we'll explore that a couple more times. If you want to change this up, you could come to neutral, tuck one toe back, start by pulsing back into that heel, and then cat-cow with one leg extended back behind you with the toes tucked under. And just notice how that feels different. You might even feel a little stretch through the front of your hip as you round your spine. Feeling your contact with the ground there. Come to neutral, and then other leg back, tuck it through the toes, maybe shift a little forwards and back. And then finding your shoulders more over your wrists, finding that cat-cow action, the arching, back bending, and rounding, curling of your spine with one leg kicked back with the toes tucked under. Exploring the way you're breathing, you might even breathe in as you round your spine and breathe out as you back bend. Let's release that. And you can sit back on your heels, or if you want, come up on your knees and rotate out through your wrists, so give them a little figure eight movement. You might hear some cracks and pops there. You can interlock them and figure eight through your interlocked hands. Quick downward facing dog here. So we'll slide our hands forwards, tuck the toes, reach back into down dog, pedal out through your feet, and casually walk your feet towards your hands. If you had blocks, you could pop them up underneath your hands so that you have a little more height there. Inhale, elongate, and bend your knees. Exhale, fold in. And notice this forward fold today. It's new. And then press into your hands. Inhale, push into your feet, elongate, maybe hands to shins. And exhale, fold in. Maybe big knee bend. One more time like that. Elongate and fold in. Take a couple breaths. You could shift forwards and back. Can you breathe along the pathway of the psoas? Imagine that you're inhaling down into your pelvis along the sides of your low back. And exhaling from your pelvis along the sides of your spine, up behind your heart. Press your feet down, press your heels down, take your arms out to the sides, come all the way up to stand, and exhale your hands down. I'm just going to turn to you. So let's take our right foot and internally rotate it from the hip. So we're going to turn the right foot in. So this is going to apply a little tug on the bottom of the psoas. So if that's not great on your knee, just do it a little bit, or you could do it a lot. Left foot forwards. Take your arms up. Either grab a hold of your elbows or your right wrist if you want. I'm going to take a hold of the forearms, right? And then side bend over to the left. So away from that internally rotated thigh. And breathe. Maybe you let your hip pop out to the side a little, and then think about your side waist moving to the right. So over to the right and bowing up. Instead of arching your back here, if you're pushing your pelvis forwards, pull it back so you're deep along the front body and wide across the back. Notice if you feel this a little differently than your classic side stretch. Maybe look up under your right elbow. Come all the way up. Release your arms and center out your right leg. So it's pointing forwards. Let's do the other side. So turn that left leg in from the hip, the knee, the foot, and let your arms come up. You can grab your left wrist or your forearms or your elbows, and then move your bum back in space so the back body feels nice and wide. And slowly come up and over to your right. You might lean your hip out to the side, and then can you lean your waist out to the side? And like out, up, and over. And maybe breathe along your low back. Psoas breathing. Inhale into the center. Let your arms go as you let your feet come more parallel to each other. Yeah. And then step to the top of the mat. Let's circle our arms out and up. Exhale, bend the knees and fold, and hands to blocks or maybe hands to shins or the floor. And we'll take our right foot back into a long lunge and let the right knee come to the ground. So you can move your blocks back. Maybe you want a little bit of softness under your right knee. So you can grab that. Untuck your back toes and start to lean back and forwards with the hips. You can do this with your breath. And you can either have your left foot planted as you move back, or if you want a little more in the posterior leg, in the back of the leg, kick the toes up. Now you can also explore moving your hips over to the right, your torso to the left, and then moving your hips over to the left and your torso to the right. Yeah, so little changes in movement side to side. Then let's lean in. And if you feel stuck on your knee, sometimes I do, I just tuck the toes under, pick up my knee, and try to land more on the top of the kneecap. Then you might come a little lower onto your blocks. So you can stay forwards. If you can locate your right frontal hip point without turning to me, but that front of the pelvis, it's more like a pelvic point rather than a hip point. And locate that and then angle it towards your left knee, towards your front knee. So it almost feels like you're turning to look over your left shoulder. You might even roll a little onto your outer right knee. And you can even turn your back toes, if you can see them, you can turn them in towards the midline. So I'll just show you that here. You can turn them in. And that's going to be the same little action as what we just did in that standing side stretch, just tugging on the bottom of the psoas a little with that internal rotation and looking over your left shoulder. So if you're really sagging your hips, try to lift them up a little. So there's a little press into your foundation. And let's take a couple more breaths. Can you breathe along the sides of your lower back? Even if you're imagining that happening, you're likely imagining that happening. But feel the spaciousness as your lungs spread and press down into your lower abdomen. So even though your lungs really fill with air, you can feel the expansion of the diaphragm moving down and spreading into the low back. And then let's slowly turn back forwards. You can face your foot straight back. Move your hips back and forwards again. Just ease up any of that tension that you might have felt in the front hip, in the back leg. And then we'll pop up off of our back knee, tuck the toes under, and step forwards, a couple steps or a big step forwards to elongate and fold. You could use your blocks. 2 more times, elongate and fold. And elongate there, press into your feet. Fold and stay a couple breaths, dangle your head, shake it out, yes and no. Maybe bend your knees, arms out to the sides. And press into your heels. Come all the way up. And release your arms. Okay, other side. Arms out and up. And fold in. Okay, let's take our left leg back into that long lunge and let the knee and the top of the foot come down. Sometimes you get caught up on that back knee. You can tuck your toes, pick up the knee, try to land on the top of the back knee, more towards the thigh, and then start to shift forwards and back. If you're accustomed to breathing louder in your asana practice and it feels like it gives you something to give attention to, that's great, but also noticing if you are hardening your throat area or restricting your breath with the sound. So you can have a soft sound, but make sure that you're still being able to breathe fully into your low lungs. You can start to shift forwards. Maybe you're lower down on your blocks if you have them, or maybe even take your hands to the ground or your fingertips. You could angle the back toes more towards the midline. See if that gives you a different sensation through your left hip. And then start to aim your left pelvic point, the front of your left pelvis, towards your right knee. So you're kind of looking over your right shoulder. And if you're really sagging your hips to the floor, push into your foundation a little. So if you're feeling like twingy, overstretched sensations, you kind of support that by pushing into your foundation and look over your right shoulder. Notice what you feel there. Can you breathe along the low back? When you inhale, think about spreading your breath down the sides of your lower spine. Locate that. And as you exhale from your pelvis all the way back up to the low lungs, maybe even behind the heart. And slowly face yourself back to the front and start to gently shift forwards and back again. And we'll tuck those back toes under, lift up there. Maybe a couple steps or a big step steps you forwards to the top of the mat for 3 halfway lifts. So halfway lift, forward fold. Maybe a big knee bend there, halfway lift. You might be working your legs a little more towards straight. Lift up, push into your feet. Fold in, take a couple breaths. Notice the difference at the front of your hip creases. Is there any more space there? Arms out and up, come all the way up. Release your arms. Feel your feet pressing into the ground. So your psoas loves to be grounded. So press into your feet as you circle your arms up. Keep feeling your feet as you fold forwards. Push your feet into the ground. Hands on blocks or the shins or the floor. Lengthen out. And step back to either your quadruped position or your downward facing dog. And come down onto your knees. So now we're going to start our exploration on our back. You won't need your thick blocks anymore, but you might need your strap if you have it handy. So just keep it beside you. And then we'll take our blanket and roll it up so it gives you a little bit of height like that. Depending on, the size of your blanket, it's going to be different for everyone. But I've got about a couple inches of height without being squished down, or 1.5 inches. And I'm going to take that underneath my pelvis. So can roll on back down and have that little bit of height for the pelvis. So it's just a little amount. And then we'll work with cat-cow movements once you get settled in there, and also a engagement and release of this psoas area. So let's begin by taking the right knee in towards the chest with the height under the pelvis, either hooking under the knee or on top of the knee and drawing it in with your hands. And we'll slide out through the left leg, keeping the heel on the ground. So if you can imagine someone is actually grabbing your left ankle, your straight leg, and tugging it forwards, like trying to make your leg one size longer, imagine that that's happening. Maybe I've even given you that assistant class before. You can think about that, getting that little tug, stretching through the inner line of the leg, and then you can release it there. And you can move your pelvis a little left and right, a little forwards and back on your prop, on your blanket. Little movements. We'll take a couple breaths into the front of the left hip. And also you might be feeling a good stretch on the glute of your right leg. Maybe some congestion in the front of the right hip. It's definitely no contest on how big the movement is, more tracking sensation, staying with it, staying with your breathing. Okay, then we're gonna let the left leg bend again, so let the left leg plant. Let go of the hands on the right knee, and then we'll curl up. So you can hold your head for this, or if you want a neck strengthen, you can reach your hands forwards and curl up so your head is coming close to your knee, or hold your head, curl up like that. And then we're gonna slowly slide. As we slide the right leg out towards straight, we're going to let the head and neck come down to the ground. Slide it out and let it dangle. And then we're gonna notice, breathe along the low back on the right side. Notice if there's any sense of release in the right hip flexor. You might even kind of roll it side to side. You could even take your arms a little over your head and take a breath there to notice into that right hip flexor, right side of the lower back. And we'll switch sides with that. So we'll draw the right knee in, bring the left knee in and hold on to it. Underneath or on top of the knee, squeeze it in towards you. And slowly start to slide the right leg out towards straight, staying heel on the ground. And then imagine someone's tugging on your right leg, like pulling on it. You might even kind of hover it, float it above the ground, and feel a tug through the big toe line, inner knee, inner thigh. Try not to arch your low spine when you're doing this. If you're feeling some arching and engagement of your lower back muscles, pull your left knee in more so that you squish your low back towards the floor as you reach out through your right leg. Yeah. You can let your right leg relax and maybe even close your eyes and track sensation. Do the psoas breath. If you can imagine breathing along the pathway of the psoas that we envisioned is along the low sides of the spine, along the sides, left and right, through the front of the pelvis and into the upper thigh bone. Breathing close to the center. And then we'll slowly plant that right foot. Let go our hands on the left knee. Try to keep it close in towards us. And either take the hands to lift the head if you've got neck mischief going on, or you can work with some neck strengthening and upper abdominal strengthening as reach forwards and tuck your head in towards your left knee, and then pull everything together for a moment, maybe even press into your right foot. Then we're gonna slowly release this out. So slow, incremental release of the upper spine, neck, and head, and slow sliding out of that left leg, and then poof, just feel that falling into a space of softness and grace. And notice what you notice at the front of the left hip. So engage and release. Take a moment to be in the residue of that. You might even take your arms over your head. Beautiful. And we'll release that and plant the right foot. And now we're going to move our prop a little bit up. So we're going to move it into our low back area. And I'm noticing for this one actually, I want a little more roundness to my blanket fold. So I'm actually going to roll it like a little burrito roll. So I have a little bit more roundness. And then take my low back up and over top of that. So I want it to be just straight in my low back. Pelvis is on the ground, chest is on the ground. And I've got that support in my low back. So if you had quite a big blanket, leave part of it unrolled. If it's like jutting your upper back or your ribs up or jutting your low back up too much and it feels a bit more like an aggressive opening, just leave a bit of it unrolled and you can rest your pelvis on it. So here we are. You can choose a space for your arms. Maybe you want your arms out to the sides. Maybe you want them over your head or bent like cactus arms. And then walk your feet more underneath your knees, and we'll press into the feet and lift the pelvis off the ground. So we're tucking the tailbone under. So you're tucking the tailbone towards the backs of the knees as you lift the pelvis off the ground. Low back is still on the blanket roll. And then slowly let your seat come back down to the floor. So I'm arching my low back a little bit, but it's more coming from my pelvis. And then let the pelvis drop down to the floor. So it's a very small movement. Press into the feet, tuck the tailbone under, and lift the pelvis up. So I also feel an engagement from my glutes here. Length through the front of the hips, like a hollowing through the abdomen. And then I'll roll over the prop and aim my sits bones for the floor, and touch the floor with the buttocks, maybe even the backs of the sit bones. And so keep going with that. You can close your eyes as you tuck the pelvis up, and then roll pelvis back down to the floor. So it's gentle movement in the pelvis and low back. And explore with your breath. So you could inhale as you come up and exhale as you come down, or switch that. And we'll do it about 5 more times. Three. Exploring at your own pace. You could go much faster or slower than I'm going. Can you feel this really coming from the pelvis instead of the low back? So the initiation of the movement is from the pelvis, the glutes. And then we'll release that out. And you can outstretch your legs, make a big X if you like. And notice whatever you feel there in the front of the hip flexors and the low back area. Take a breath, maybe even along the low spine. And then we're going to plant our feet and move the prop up the back. So we'll lift ourselves up and aim that prop for our low rib area. So it's coming out of the low back curve and into the lower ribs. So you'll maybe have a little bit of rib thrust happening here. Your ribs pop up a bit. That's okay. And now we're going to take our hands behind the back of our head and just see if you can have your elbows wide. If the elbows don't want to go wide, keep your elbows leaning up towards the ceiling. And then we're going to do little lifts. Your shoulder blade area might not even come off the floor. It might. So we're going to lift a little bit up our head and lower it back down. And if you want to, when you lower down, you can let your elbows go wide. So little lift, pressing your mid back into the prop and slowly lower down. Let's do about 5 more. So pressing down, little lift up. Maybe the shoulder blades come off, maybe they don't. And lower back down. You might even look at your front ribs when you're doing these movements and check out if they're fairly symmetrical side to side. Of course, we won't be symmetrical, but if you're noticing a big difference, you're tipping to one side, you can adjust yourself a little. So let's do about 2 more. I'm moving so slow that I feel a little bit of shaking happening. This is an area of weakness in my body, or I shouldn't say weakness actually, but sensory motor amnesia maybe. It's not as used to engaging. Little movements. Okay, and then we'll settle down there. You can either keep your hands behind the back of your head if that's comfortable for your shoulders and let your elbows go wide, or you can release your arms out into a place that feels more comfortable for you, and then slide your legs out, make like an X. Close your eyes and breathe along the low back area and notice whatever you feel from the low ribs through the hip flexor area, through the low back. And then we're going to bend the knees, roll a little over to the side, and we're just going to switch the position of our blanket roll. So now we're going to move it so that it's lengthways along with our spine. And you can fold the bottom part of it up like this. So that area is going to go in between the shoulder blades. So, if you have a really thick blanket, you don't want it to be too high of height because you'll notice that. So if it's too high, you could always put another blanket or a block underneath your head. But I'm trying to, with this prop setup, have it so that there's elevation in between my shoulder blades, and then my head is a little lower than that. So it's wiggle down until the edge of the blanket is more in between your shoulder blades. And you can also have, if it's too much for your shoulders, you can have your hands on your abdomen or your ribs. And if you're really lifting your chin up like that, you can always put something underneath your head, a little bit of extra padding. Okay. So let's check out how this feels as we work along the spine, inevitably juicing up the whole spinal area and the psoas, iliopsoas area. So here we are. Let's take our fingers together over top of our sternum. And palms face each other, and then open up the arms and stretch the fingers apart from each other just until you feel enough sensation, and then bring them back together. So they definitely don't need to come all the way down to the floor, although that might feel great for some. But you're oscillating them open and stretching the front of the chest away from the midline, from the sternum. These are the tensegrity arms, but with an elevated chest this time. And explore this moving apart with the hands and coming back together. Notice the differences in your two shoulders. You might even look up and in between your hands, look where they unite. And then let your peripheral vision follow your hands as far as you can go. Follow them with your peripheral vision as your gaze stays up towards the ceiling. And again, you're not going to be symmetrical, likely. Maybe there's a few people. But if you're finding that one side is doing something way different, you can assist yourself a little, maybe make the movement a little smaller. You can hover your arms and hold them above the ground. All right, and then let's release our arms out, either out to the sides, lower, or if you like, you can interlock your hands and take your hands over your head. And drape yourself over that prop in between your shoulder blades. Take a few moments. Okay, we'll release that out. Roll over to the side and keep this blanket situation and just move it up. And then we'll roll back and put our head on top of it. So now that support is underneath the head. You can move your head a little left and right. And now your chest is on the ground. Okay, so there's a couple of options for this one. You can draw your right knee in towards your chest again, hold it in, and elongate your left leg. Same as we did. This one's really effective for the hip flexor area. Or if you like, you can take your strap and hook it around the right arch and kick up through your right leg. So you're coming more into a hamstring stretch or posterior leg, back of the calf. And either keep your left foot planted or slide it out. And same thing here, think about that left leg getting pulled by someone, pulled through the big toe, pulled through the inner knee, inner groin. And your right leg can be a bit bent. You can oscillate it, bend and straighten. You can, like I've done, is wrap your hands around the strap a couple of times, like a little boxer tape wrap, and hang your shoulders from that so it doesn't feel like you're gripping with your fingers. And this little elevation of your head. You can even turn your head side to side and notice that. All the different places along your spine that you've put the support, and maybe some of them were easeful, and some of them were even like borderline painful or uncomfortable. And you're exploring all of them and noticing how your back body feels now. So let's take a couple breaths. You might even swing your legs side to side, just noticing all those different places around the hip. You can think about pressing your leg away from you to get a bit more length in your low back. And you can also breathe along your low back here. Let's take 5 more breaths. You can breathe down the low spine into the hip flexor area, into the front of the hips. And breathe up from the hip flexors to the low lungs and maybe even behind the heart. Each inhale, you can think of creating width across the back, width and depth across the front. And each exhale, length. Okay, let's slowly let this left foot plant first. And unhook your strap. Bend your right knee in, and we're going to do that same thing again. So without lifting your head, keep your head on the prop this time, but press into your left foot almost till you elevate your pelvis and draw your right knee in close to you without using your hands. Okay? Close, close, close. Press into the left foot so strongly that the pelvis elevates off the ground. And then slowly let the pelvis come down and slide out through the right leg and until it comes down to the ground, and then fall into gravity. And close your eyes and notice sensations that you have in the right side of your low spine and hip. Okay, let's switch our sides. So right foot plants, either your left knee and hug it in underneath the knee or on top, or if you're choosing that hamstring stretch on this side too, posterior leg stretch, it's not just your hamstring. You can grab your strap it up, wrap your hands around, bend and straighten, ease into it, introduce your nervous system to it, and then slide your right leg out if you like. You don't have to. And let the right leg feel like it's getting tugged out from your pelvis, so really long and lengthened and long on the right side of your low back. And hold on to your strap in a way that's not gripping in the fronts of your shoulders. You can let the upper back get nice and heavy. And you might even roll your head around on this nice blanket roll that you have. Let your head slide side to side. Let your leg move in micro movements, noticing the difference. This is your practice, so you can really add in different things to your practice that your body's craving. Really attend to yourself. And notice here, if your low back wants to arch off the ground, can you really let it drop down? And as you're breathing down your low back, if you're imagining that, breathe wide across your low back. Think about your low back widening and plugging down. Couple more breaths here. And then we'll slowly bend the right leg so it's planted again. Bend the left knee so it comes in towards us. And here, I'll take the strap to the side. So keep your head on the prop, press into your right foot, draw the left knee in without using your hands. Lift your pelvis off the ground. It's almost like you're trying to go up into a little mini bridge so you can really feel your glutes. And hold it for a sec. And then we're gonna slowly let the pelvis come down and slowly slide out through the left leg. Slide it out. And shake it out when it lands on the ground. And then maybe close your eyes and notice the front of that hip, the left lower back. And then we'll plant that foot as well. Okay, we're gonna switch gears and turn over onto our abdomen. So roll on over. Oh, hard to get up. And we're gonna take our blanket roll now and place it so I don't think anyone in this class is pregnant, but if anyone's pregnant at home, I could show you this one you're not gonna wanna do. So you might go into in the next two you're not going to want to do. So you could put your legs up the wall or take a figure 4 stretch instead, or skip this part of the video. So with your blanket roll, you can come on down and place it in between your pelvis and your low ribs. So that might mean that you want to roll it up a little more, a little rounder. And then you can stack your hands in front and turn your head to one side or take your forehead down. And we're simply going to be here. So you are welcome to make micro movements or simply breathe here. If you've had a big breakfast burrito for breakfast, I actually did this practice after eating a big oily salad, and I could slowly feel it coming up. So you could make your roll a little smaller if you're getting a lot of pressure into the abdomen and it's uncomfortable. But you can rest here and breathe. When you breathe, can you feel your low back lifting up with your inhale and dropping back down with your exhale? So really spreading the back lungs, back of the body. And if you like, you can do these little micro movements. So tucking the pelvis under, engaging the glutes, taking your tailbone to the ground, and then releasing that. And you can maybe lift the sit bones up a little bit, like you're doing a cat-cow with the pelvis. So you can tuck pelvis under. Notice what you feel in the front of your hips. And you can really slow this down, and then you can press your abdomen into the prop and lift the sit bones up. You can also experiment with having your feet pretty wide. So this is a really subtle practice, I know, but maybe it's designed to provide less of a stretch and strength and more of a hydration and kind of a renewal of fluidity in this area. So as you're bringing these small movements in, know that motion is lotion for your low back. Those micro movements are tender and gentle, generally feeling pretty safe for your nervous system, so your nervous system can relax into the movements and maybe gain a new sense of movement there. Safety is really paramount to that, familiarity. And then after you've done a few of those movements, release out. If you've been having your head to one side the whole time, you can turn it to the other side, even just for a moment. Rest into that, and then let's come on up, and we're going to switch this up a little bit. So you really use your hands to help you come up there. I know sometimes it's hard to get up after this work. And then we're going to turn our prop again lengthways on the mat. and make that little thicker roll right there at the bottom of the blanket. So now check out how this feels for you. We're gonna take this roll of blanket onto, if you locate your frontal hip point, we're gonna take it in like just above the pubic bone into the place where the psoas is closest to the skin, which is, if you can locate that frontal pelvic point, it's like on the inside of that. So it's in this soft, low abdomen area. So I'll show you what I'll do with that. So I'll take that right just above the pubic bone, and then I'm gonna move it, depending on the size of your blanket, like I'm gonna move myself so that the blanket roll is a little more into the right side. So I shift left a little bit, and then let my left knee come up. So it's like a little lizard pose, like that. And it's nice to have your knee on the mat or on a blanket if you have it. And if it's uncomfortable, if it's painful, you can move up and down, or you can release out the blanket roll so you have a little less height. So you don't want it to be painful. You kind of want it to feel like a relief. And then I like to turn my head in the direction of my bent knee. So I stack the hands in front, turn the head on the direction of the bent knee. And then you can kind of wobble your hips side to side. Just feel if you're getting like really gentle pressure into the front of that right hip bone. And remember what we were working with of feeling like the outstretched leg is getting tugged. So if you tuck your back toes under and lift up your knee, and I'm actually like trying to slide my toes away from me, slide them out and reach that leg out of the pelvis, and then let it rest. So maybe I got a little bit of more space in my hip, so I'll do that again. So tuck the outstretched leg, my right leg, tuck the toes, lift the knee off, and then slide it out, like push out through the toes, and then rest the top of the foot on the ground. Notice whatever you're noticing there. You can make little micro movements side to side. You can even do the pelvic rock, the little cat-cow with your pelvis. Tuck the pelvis under, and then release the sit bones a little bit, backing up, maybe spread the sit bones, if you can think about that. Tuck the pelvis under, the sit bones come a little closer together, and as you lift the sit bones, they might widen apart. So little micro movements. You don't have to do those, but sometimes they give you more feedback, even more release, that motion, that lotion for your pelvis and your low back area. Let's take a couple more breaths here. If this one's not so comfortable for you and it doesn't feel safe in your body, come back to that last one where the blanket roll was across the abdominal, more perpendicular, and you can even move it a little up and down and explore moving it towards your low ribs or towards your hip bones. Okay, so to come out of this, I'm actually going to roll over onto my right side because I don't want to press up after that. And roll back onto my abdomen and widen out through the legs, and then stack the hands and shake out the pelvis left and right a little. Notice the effects, notice the differences on the two sides. You could, if you needed to do like a child's pose or like come up onto your knees. Sometimes people like to stretch back in that one before we go over onto the other side. So I'm just going to turn. You don't need to turn. I'm just going to turn so you can see me a little bit better. We'll take that roll of the blanket And my right knee is gonna come up this time. And I'm gonna place that into that low belly area above the pubic bone and a little to the left. So it's kind of on the inside of that left hip point. And I can move up and down till it feels just right. Lower the prop if you need to. And stack your hands and rest your head down. Sometimes folks put a ball in this area or, block or something, and those are all really nice ways to release if you want more sensation. I find this one is just a little gentler and can work for different people. With gentleness, tenderness in this area, it's a really tender area for many of us. So if you want to do that outstretched leg, so the left leg, tuck the toes under, lift the knee, and then press it out. Push out through your toes. Try to get that leg one size longer, and then release it out. You can do that one more time. Tuck the toes, lift up, and reach out. Push out. Nice stretch for the sole of your foot, too. And then maybe those little micro movements of tucking the pelvis under and releasing that, maybe lifting the sit bones up a little. And if you're not used to moving your pelvis a lot, this can be quite nice to get some movement and hydration in there. This will translate all the way up through your spine. You might even feel as you do that pelvic tilting that you can feel it all the way, like how far up your spine can you feel that movement rippling up? And you might rest in stillness for the few more moments we have here. You might stay there for a little longer, or if you're ready to come off, you can roll, just simply roll to your left a bit. Take that blanket roll out, roll back onto your abdomen. Wobble out through your hips. And take any rebound that you might need to. So maybe for some it feels nice to stretch back into a child's. And we're going to move towards Shavasana here. I just want to mention that it would be really nice to do a Shavasana with your legs up the wall. To really let the thigh bones sink down into the pelvis. So I'm going to show that. You might want to put an extra layer on. You might want to do a few more movements that will just allow you to get really comfortable for relaxation. Some folks would rather sit in a meditation. That's great. You can sit in a meditation. If you want to put your legs up the wall, you could use your blanket roll. So you could take your seat close to the wall here, like in a little fetal position on the edge of your mat, and then roll over so that your back lands on your mat. Center yourself out there and then dig your heels into the wall so you can easily lift up your pelvis. And place that blanket support underneath your pelvis. So it's just a little softness underneath your pelvis. And if you need to have your hips a little more away from the wall, you can have that. Inching your low ribs away from your pelvis. Hands can be wherever, opened up on the abdomen perhaps. Wherever you're ending up landing, if it's in your preferred shavasana or your legs up the wall or your meditation, take a few breaths in and exhale them fully out of your mouth. And then with, soft legs, if your legs are up the wall, really let the weight of your thighs drop, plummet into your hips. Feel that your back of your hips are getting kind of filled up with the weight of your legs. And you get that sense of wideness across the back, that depth across the front of the abdomen. And you might close your eyes and notice the effects of the practice. Let your legs relax. Don't worry about their alignment here. Notice the pump of the breath. Notice the quality of your mind. If those intentional movements give you a sense of freedom in your mind, a bit more space. Something I read recently from Michael Stone that I loved and have said to myself a few times over the last week is that there's no freedom separate from this moment. So you might want to stay there for a little longer. You're welcome to stay for as long as you have time for. Or you can stretch out through your arms. Maybe if your legs are up the wall, you can draw your knees in towards your chest and give yourself a little hug. And roll over onto one side and take a breath there. And take your time to come up to a seat. We can close our class with the sound of Om 3 times if you'd like to make some sound and connect to the vibration of sound. So if it's a gesture you like, you can take your hands together at your heart and tuck your chin a couple degrees. Take your time to take a few grounding breaths. Let's breathe in, exhale everything out in 3 Oms. Om.